The river betrayal. The settlement gathered like a jury around the riverbank. Whispers spread through the crowd, sharp as thorns, accusing Elena Marlowe of sins she had never confessed aloud. Some claimed she had cursed her late husband, others that she had welcomed another man's arms before the soil of a marriage bed had grown cold. Rumor had become verdict, and the settlers believed cleansing her in the river would silence their unease. Elena stood at the edge, bound in fear though no rope held her. Her black gown clung to her frame, heavy with mourning and dust. The river moved restlessly below, a serpent of foam and current that promised no return. She raised her eyes, not to beg, but to search for a shred of humanity in the faces glaring back. None offered mercy. A man shouted, "Let the river judge her." The cry was taken up like a hymn, and hands pressed against her shoulders, forcing her forward. Elena's breath caught. She had endured loneliness, hunger, and grief, but this was cruelty beyond reason. Somewhere deep within her, she wondered if the whispers were not punishment for her secret heart. For even as she mourned her husband, the memory of Thomas, his rough hands, his forbidden tenderness, still smoldered within her. The crowd surged. Her foot slipped on wet stone. Cold spray kissed her cheek. Just as she braced herself for the plunge, a thunder of hooves broke the chant. A rider burst into view, his figure stark against the afternoon light. Richard Hale, the widower of wealth and reputation, reined his horse hard, scattering the settlers. His voice, commanding and sharp, silenced the mob. "Is this justice?" he thundered, "or murder cloaked in piety?" The settlers fell back, muttering. Some averted their eyes, others bristled with shame. Elena clung to the bank, trembling, while Richard dismounted in one smooth motion. He crossed to her, extending a gloved hand. She hesitated, fear and gratitude warring within her, before placing her fingers in his. His grip was steady, a lifeline pulling her from the brink. Once she stood safely beside him, he turned to the assembly. "You call yourselves godly, yet you condemn without trial. If she is guilty, let heaven decide, not your malice." Silence lingered, broken only by the restless water. The settlers, cowed by his presence, began to disperse in sullen defeat. One by one, they drifted back toward their homes, until the riverbank held only Elena and Richard. Elena lowered her gaze. "Why would you defend me, when even my neighbors would see me gone?" Richard studied her, his expression unreadable. "Because I know injustice when I see it, and because you deserve protection, not persecution." His words struck deeper than she expected. She had known Richard only from a distance, a man of means, widowed like herself, whose land stretched wider than the horizon. He carried an air of command, and though grief had carved shadows in his features, strength radiated from him like heat from a flame. Still shaken, Elena whispered, "You have risked much for me. They will not forget your defiance." "They will forget when they see you under my name," he replied, almost fiercely. Then, softer, "Marry me, Elena. Let me shield you from their venom. Alone, you will not endure their cruelty. With me, you will be untouchable." The proposal struck her like a wave. Marriage, so soon after widowhood, so sudden after near-death, felt both salvation and prison. Yet her options were few. Alone, she was vulnerable to every whisper, every hand raised against her. Beside him, she would have sanctuary. But deep within, another voice whispered, "Thomas." The memory of his lips against hers, the secret nights of reckless longing. Her heart had never belonged to her late husband, nor to the man now offering his hand. It had belonged to Thomas, and perhaps it always would. She blinked away the thought, burying it beneath necessity. Survival demanded silence. She met Richard's gaze and nodded. "Yes, I will be your wife." Relief softened his sternness. He touched her hand again, more gently this time, sealing a vow before it was spoken aloud. "Then let today be remembered not as the day you were condemned, but as the day you were reborn." The river roared behind them, carrying away the echoes of judgment. Elena stood at Richard's side, safe yet unsettled, saved yet ensnared. For though her body was rescued, Her heart remained shackled to a secret that would not stay buried. And as the shadows lengthened over the water, she understood one truth with terrible clarity. Every salvation carries its price. Marriage built on secrets. Elena's wedding to Richard Hale was spoken of in hushed amazement across the settlement. Some called it providence. Others whispered that it was a bargain struck in desperation. Yet no one dared to question Richard openly. His wealth, his land, and his unyielding presence made the union untouchable. What had nearly ended as her death by the river became her shield against the same voices that condemned her. The first weeks passed in a haze of ceremony and adjustment. Richard brought her to his manor, a house of timber and stone that seemed carved out of permanence. Servants hurried at her bidding, warm fires chased away the cold, and silence ruled the halls. To many, her fortune had transformed overnight, from a widow despised to a wife exalted. Yet comfort did not quiet the restlessness within her. Richard treated her with courtesy, even devotion. His hand guided her at gatherings. His voice carried warmth when they dined. He seemed determined to prove that she had made the right choice. But beneath his attentiveness lay expectation. He valued loyalty, obedience, and gratitude above all, and Elena felt each demand like a chain invisible yet heavy. She longed for simplicity, the reckless laughter she once knew, the rough edges of life lived freely. Thomas's memory rose unbidden, tugging at her whenever the house grew too still. She had buried him in silence, told herself he was gone forever. Yet in the quiet spaces of a new life, his shadow filled the emptiness. Nights became the hardest. Richard would linger by her side, speaking of plans for the land, of crops to be sown, of alliances to strengthen. Elena nodded, listening, yet her thoughts drifted elsewhere. When at last the lights dimmed, she lay awake long after he had fallen to sleep. Her fingers traced the sheets beside her, not with desire, but with an aching absence. Still, she played her part. At church, she stood proudly beside Richard, her head bowed in humility. At markets, she greeted the settlers with measured grace, no longer an outcast but the wife of their benefactor. Smiles met her now, though she could feel the same mouths turning once her back was turned. She bore it with practiced composure, knowing Richard expected strength. Yet cracks began to show. One evening, while arranging her late husband's belongings that Richard insisted she bring into their home, she uncovered a folded scrap of paper. It was an old note from Thomas, its words simple, its ink faded, but its weight unbearable. "I will come for you, no matter the cost." Her chest tightened as she read, torn between shame and longing. She pressed it against her lips before tucking it deep into a drawer, as though hiding it might still the turmoil inside her. Richard noticed the shift. He was not a man easily deceived. He studied her silences, the distant look that sometimes clouded her eyes. One night, over supper, he asked, "Do you regret it? Leaving your widowhood behind so soon?" Elena forced a smile. "I regret nothing that has given me safety." His gaze lingered, piercing, but he said no more. Yet she sensed his suspicion, as though he could see through the veil she wrapped around herself. The more he sought her devotion, the more she feared he would discover the truth, that her heart, despite every vow, remained captive elsewhere. Time passed, but unease grew between them. Richard's kindness never faltered, but it became tempered by a quiet possessiveness. He inquired of her days in detail, pressed her to share her thoughts, demanded closeness she could not give. To the world, their union appeared steadfast. Within, it was a careful dance of concealment. On a storm-laden evening, Elena stood at the window, watching the rain carve rivers through the fields. Lightning split the sky, and for a moment she saw her own reflection superimposed on the glass. A woman both cherished and caged, rescued yet never free. Her lips parted, and though no one was near, she whispered a single name into the storm. "Thomas." The sound startled her. She pressed a hand against her chest, trembling at her own betrayal. Outside, thunder answered, rolling deep as though the heavens themselves had heard her confession. Behind her, Richard's footsteps approached. She turned swiftly, smoothing her expression, but his eyes studied her with quiet intensity. He did not ask what she had spoken. Yet she knew he had heard. The silence between them thickened, filled with questions neither dared to voice. And though the storm passed, Elena felt a different kind of tempest gathering, a storm not of weather, but of hearts, secrets, and consequences yet to come. The return of Thomas. The first sight of him came not with fanfare but with the ordinary rhythm of labor. Elena had gone to the fields one afternoon, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth. She watched men at work mending a collapsed fence, their voices rising and falling in tired rhythm. Among them, a figure straightened, lifting a beam with a strength she recognized instantly, though years had passed since last she saw him. Thomas. Her breath faltered. He looked older, leaner, the lines of hardship etched into his stance, yet his presence struck her with the force of memory. The world seemed to tilt, every sound around her blurring. She clutched her shawl tighter, fighting the impulse to run forward, to call his name as she had whispered it into storms and silence. Thomas's eyes found hers across the distance. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Recognition flared, followed by something deeper, longing, sharp and unforgotten. Then he turned back to his work, as though nothing had passed between them. But Elena felt it like a secret flame reignited. That night, she sat beside Richard at supper, but her thoughts strayed. Richard spoke of harvest yields and trade routes, yet her mind replayed the single glance, the weight of a gaze that had once belonged entirely to her. She ate little, smiled less. Richard noticed, as he always did, though he said nothing. His silence was heavier than words. Days later, chance, or fate, brought her close to Thomas again. She had gone to the barn for supplies, only to find him there, stacking sacks of grain. The air was thick with dust, sunlight slanting through the beams. For a moment they stood apart, silence taut between them. "Elena," he said at last, her name rough on his tongue, as though he had carried it through years of exile. She swallowed hard. "I thought you were gone. Dead, perhaps." "I nearly was," he admitted, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I returned. For you." Her heart twisted. "You came too late. My life, it is no longer my own." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Does your heart say the same?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. Her silence betrayed her. In that suspended moment, she felt the truth press against the wall she had built around herself. They did not touch, not yet, but the space between them burned with all the words unsaid, all the years lost. When at last she pulled away, her hands trembled. She left the barn swiftly, her footsteps echoing like accusations. From then on, secrecy bound them. Passing encounters became threads of temptation, an exchanged glance at market, a hurried word in the fields, shadows meeting at twilight. Each moment risked discovery, yet each deepened the bond they could not sever. Elena knew the danger, but the more she tried to resist, the more fiercely her heart betrayed her. Richard, meanwhile, watched with growing unease. He sensed the shift in her, the light in her eyes when she returned from errands, the way her laughter seemed rehearsed rather than natural. He asked questions gently at first, then more pointedly. "You seem distant. Is there something you withhold from me?" She denied it, smiling with practiced grace. But in the quiet after, she felt guilt claw at her. Her gratitude to Richard was genuine. He had saved her from death, from disgrace. Yet every act of kindness from him felt like a stone on her chest, crushing the truth she could not speak. One evening, when the house lay still and Richard had gone to rest, Elena slipped outside. The moonlight bathed the fields, silver and silent. Thomas waited near the edge of the woods, his figure half hidden in shadow. She approached, her breath uneven, her heart hammering. When their hands finally touched, it was as though time itself unraveled. No words were needed. The silence between them spoke louder than any vow. Yet even in that closeness, fear gnawed at her. They were trespassers in their own lives, stealing moments that could destroy everything. "Meet me again," Thomas whispered. "We will find a way, whatever it costs." She hesitated, torn between survival and desire. Then she nodded, her hand lingering in his before pulling away. She turned back toward the house, each step heavy with betrayal. At the window above, a curtain shifted. Richard's silhouette stood still, watching. His face could not be seen, but Elena felt his presence like a blade poised above her. The storm she had feared was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Betrayal exposed. The air inside the Hale Manor had grown colder, though no fire had gone out. Elena felt it each evening, in Richard's silence, in the weight of his gaze that lingered too long. He did not accuse her directly, yet suspicion hung in every pause between his words. She carried her guilt like a cloak, heavy and unshakable. When she slipped away at night, she told herself he slept. When she returned, she prayed he had not noticed. But Richard was not a man easily deceived. He watched, he waited, and his patience was the sharpest weapon she had ever known. It was on a moonless night that the truth finally broke. Elena had stolen from her bed to meet Thomas once more at the edge of the woods. Their voices were hushed, their touches desperate, as though both knew time was running thin. "Elena," Thomas whispered, clutching her hands. "Leave with me. Tonight. We can start anew, far from here. You owe him nothing. Your heart is mine." Tears burned her eyes. She wanted to believe him, to surrender to the promise of escape. Yet the image of Richard's face intruded, stained, wounded, the face of the man who had saved her when the world turned cruel. Her voice cracked. "He gave me protection. Without him, I would not be alive. And with him," Thomas pressed, "you are not living at all." Before she could answer, a shadow parted from the trees. Richard stepped into the clearing, his figure tall and unyielding, his eyes lit by cold fire. Neither Elena nor Thomas spoke. The silence was its own confession. "So," Richard said at last, his voice low but steady, the whispers were true. "I saved you from the river, Elena, only to be drowned by your betrayal." Elena's knees weakened. "Richard, do not speak," he cut in, though his tone was not rage but something more harrowing, sorrow. "I gave you my name, my home, my trust, and you gave me shadows." Thomas moved forward, defiant. "She was mine long before she was yours. You married her for power, not love." Richard's eyes flicked to him, sharp as a blade. "And you abandoned her when she needed you most. I see little difference between cowardice and theft." The words hung heavy, each one a judgment. Elena stood between them, torn by loyalties that cut both ways. She wanted to defend them both, yet her silence betrayed the truth, that her heart had never truly chosen. Richard stepped closer, his face unreadable. "Tell me, Elena, do you love him?" Her breath faltered. She could not lie. "Yes." The word shattered the night. Richard closed his eyes, as though the admission pierced deeper than any weapon. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, when he spoke again, his voice was weary, broken. "Then you are no wife of mine." He turned, his cloak brushing the earth, and walked back toward the manor without another glance. The weight of his footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the echo of what had been lost. Elena trembled. Relief should have come, freedom, at last, from the cage of her marriage. Yet what filled her instead was dread. For in his retreat there had been no forgiveness, no understanding, only finality. Thomas touched her shoulder. "It is done. He will not bind you now." She pulled away, tears streaking her face. "Do you not see? He may have released me, but the cost is ruin. The settlement will not forgive me. I am a wife cast aside, a betrayer unveiled. There is no future here for either of us." Thomas tried to hold her, but she shook her head, stepping back. The path before her was no longer one of love or safety, but exile. She had chosen with her heart, yet the choice had left her with nothing whole. As dawn crept across the horizon, Elena returned alone to the riverbank where it had all begun. The water rushed endlessly, indifferent to the tragedies of those who lived beside it. She stood at the edge, listening to its roar, feeling its pull. The river had once promised death, then life, and now it seemed to whisper judgment again. She closed her eyes, whispering not to Richard, not to Thomas, but to herself. Every salvation carries its price. The water surged, carrying the sound away, leaving only the question of what she would choose next.